Hey, Tim. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm okay.
Good.
I'm about to try and put you on the big screen here. I've got this Apple TV, this little box. So I'm going to see
Right.
if I can switch you to Apple TV. I'm going to see if I could stream you from the
You.
laptop.
TV button. 1 of 5.
So let me see if I could figure this out.
Yeah, we don't have Apple TV, but that's probably going to be our next purchase.
Larry, it says Apple TV.
Yeah, no, that's a different app. Yeah, I got you now. You're on our big screen there. I just got to get you to.
TV star. Wow.
Yeah, wait here.
Oh, I can see.
I'll turn this around and maybe you'll be able to see us. You'll see what I'm talking about. Oh, you can't see yourself on the screen, can you?
No. Interesting.
Maybe a little closer, maybe. Just on the big screen TV. Too much shadow.
Yeah. I can see kind of.
Yeah, we can see it pretty clearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I darken the room, it would be better.
Now, is this something new? Is this something new that you have?
No, we bought this several years ago, and what it does is that it's a handy device for doing presentations. If you have any Apple devices, whether or not it's a phone or whether it's an iPad or whatever, they have a little button on it that you can click that says Apple TV, but the real purpose of it is you're sharing the screen. So whatever I see with you now on the on the screen here, I could share it with the device that I'm near, and it wirelessly sends it to the large screen TV. So as long as you have that little box, you take the little box that you buy, it's like $100, and you plug it into the HDMI port. And then as long as you got the right HDMI, you've got to set it up with your internet, the password and things like that. And then it communicates with other Apple devices. So I could be watching you on my little phone, okay? And just get the internet on the phone, and then I can get you directly onto the Apple TV. It's in a way, it's like Roku, but it's really only for Apple devices.
Right.
So,
yeah. I'll have to try it. I mean, because I've used Apple my whole life because back when computers were first coming into schools, all the educational software was through Apple, through Macintosh. And so schools automatically geared themselves toward Apple. And so I thought, well, if that's the case, then at home, I'm going to have the same thing. And so I've stuck with Apple for my whole time since I bought my very first computer.
That's what happened to us.
Well, we had PCs, we had Gateway and Dell, and we had some of the other ones. But what brought us to Apple was, first of all, when they opened the stores in the malls in New Jersey, and those are absolutely sensational because for $100, I remember, you get all the lessons you want. You sign up, they had a whole bunch of different lessons.
Yes.
The second thing was that they gave you a tremendous amount of software, whereas in the early days, you had to buy the software. So here you've got a whole slew of the equivalent of, what was Word, and Keynote became, it was just sensational. The movie programs, the editing programs. And the third thing was, they always seemed to be way ahead in their virus protection. Either people didn't, they had a smaller market, so that they didn't seem to get viruses and they didn't seem to get hacked into as much. It's changed a little bit, but they're still pretty good at that. So those were
I've always been happy with it.
Yeah. No, we've liked it. Just got a new Apple iPad. Actually, the kids bought us for our anniversary.
That's
nice. I haven't figured out how to use it, but it's got all these touch screen things now with the Apple Pen, So if you're an artist, it's good.
Yeah, I still use an Apple laptop at home, but it's time to upgrade. So I think I'm just going to go to an Apple iPad when I do that. And I mean, I use the synagogue, everything at the synagogue is PC. So when I first started working there, it was a learning curve for me because I really don't know a lot on the PC. I don't go that side of it, but being there now, I figured it out. But
So many of the programs now work both ways.
Yes,
It doesn't
yes.
really matter,
Yeah.
it's very similar.
Yeah,
Very
at the
similar.
beginning, they were very, very different. I mean, when people first started getting into home computers and all of that, the two were so non-compatible and so different. Um,
Competitors, and then I think they developed programs where what does Apple have? I think it's called Pages compared to Word, and you can go
Right.
from one to the other seamlessly. Or if I create a program on Keynote, I could put it on PowerPoint just with one click
right.
on the Apple program. So they've gone away from that.
Right, because if I prepare a PowerPoint at the synagogue, like when I used to do the Friday night programs after services, I could take that, I could plug it into my Mac and it would work. I could plug it into a PC, it would work. There was no problem going back and forth between the platforms anymore.
Yeah, sometimes I found that going from PowerPoint to Keynote or vice versa, you lose some of the features. If you've got some of these jazzy features of where the words come in, one at a time, they may click in one at a time, or they
Right.
may, appear
Right.
and disappear. And sometimes you'll lose a feature there because one
Right.
program is different. I'll let you welcome everybody else.
Well, that's Jeff.
There's Jeff. Welcome, Jeff.
Welcome, welcome. So I guess your readings came through to Jason just fine, so everything's okay. I spoke with the rabbi yesterday afternoon, so. But you're still muted, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I didn't hear back from the rabbi. I assume everything's okay.
Yeah, I spoke with the rabbi.
on
He
a-
said it was all good. Yeah,
Right, on an Apple phone, you can use AirDrop to get those very large files over.
yeah,
You just can't email it out, Tim. It either
Yeah.
has to be done by attachment or something.
yeah. Well, like I said, I knew the rabbi would be the one to go to because he's been dealing with people with these, ever since we started. He's that end of it. If I get the people the readings and get them set up, and it's like, okay, technical issues, call the rabbi.
Right, you were right. He had the answer. Although he's not as familiar with Apple, I gave it a shot, and apparently Rich got that. So
Yeah.
and I think you're right about the we could have used the drop also. That would have worked.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you just it depends on what it is. I don't know. When we did ours, we were able to send it from our phone. I think we did, but I don't know why. Who knows? Who knows? But see, our files might have been a little bit smaller because ours was shorter because we were doing the Torah blessings. Where when you're doing a reading, it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit longer. So I don't know. I said, I'm not a computer person, so the technical side of it, I'll let the rabbi deal with it.
So if you screw it up tomorrow, Jeff, it's not the program, it's you.
No,
You
I
got
got
no
a quick,
excuse.
Larry.
Everything works. Everything
Larry.
works.
Larry, no, I know it works. It did work, but Larry, quick question. You do a lot of videoing. Do you get a choice to make your files smaller? I mean, is there I'm sorry, less definition? I know on all pictures you can send it on email with less definition and size. Can you do that on videoing?
When you create the program in iMovie, usually, I take it on an SD card on my video cam, or I guess you could do it off of your phone, and you create it in I'm not sure what you're creating it in what format. It's probably an MPEG, and then you basically when they ask you to store it, they ask you the quality. When you
Okay,
want to store it, when you want to save it,
yeah,
then you can select a different quality. And they have a little chart there which shows you the type of quality that's good if you just want to show it on TV, because TV is only going to give you a poorer quality anyway. But if you want to, show it onto your computer, you get a little higher quality. So yeah, you can get your choice of how you save it. And each file,
okay.
it's almost exponential, the amount of storage space it takes if you went to the best storage compared to the normal storage. Yeah, it's similar to JPEG. The way you store a JPEG, you can increase
it. Right.
the file size on those.
And what did you say? What did you say was the best storage mode in video?
Well, I just used the one that's marked for TV, which is the lowest, one of the lowest one. It's like
got it.
670 or something. I forget what it is, but I use that as the default. I don't even look at it anymore. You know, with Zoom now, the problem is I noticed that when I show something that I've recorded, and even if it's a something from YouTube, and then I take that clip and I show it on Zoom, doesn't cooperate that well. It seems like there's a lot of either bad sound or there's a lot of
There's a separation.
there's a difference delay. The rabbi noticed the other day when he was doing his talk, remember, he had a couple of clips of the Groucho Marxes and things like that. The sound came in very poorly. So yeah, Zoom got some problems with with showing YouTube stuff.
Yeah, Zoom is fine for like this meetings where it's just people, chatting and whatever. But when you start to get into more like if you want to show a clip of a movie or you want to show something, music, whatever, it tends to have a lot of distortion, a lot of problems with it.
Okay.
So we watched a little bit of the Savannah Voice Festival. I don't know if you've been catching that, and they've done a pretty good job, I thought. Their sound depends on which performers you listen to, but if everybody, one or two of them came in sensational.
Well, that's good.
The Voice Festival. I think
All
it's
right.
still going on, the Savannah Voice Festival.
I guess we'll get started here. If people join us throughout, that's fine, as always. So let's start with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commands us to study the words of Torah. All right, so we are continuing through Deuteronomy as we will until we get to Simchat Torah and we end Torah readings and start back at the beginning with Bereshit. So we've been in Deuteronomy about 4 weeks now, if my memory serves me correctly. We are in the portion that is called Reah, and we have a lot of the same themes being reiterated that we've had in the first portions. So Moses is still speaking. Remember that so much of this portion is this grand speech, oration that Moses is giving to the Israelites before they enter the promised land. Once again, they're reminded that if they want to be successful as a people and as a nation, it is imperative that they observe all of God's laws. Moses continually reminds them of that, and he does so again here. There's a description, a rather detailed description of how they are to create their space for worship and sacrifices. It should be in a central location. It makes it quite clear that people just can't randomly offer sacrifices from wherever they feel like it. Moses explains to them that as they are creating worship spaces, once they are in the promised land, that any reminders of previous idol worship that may be there, or any reminders of other gods that are still standing, must be destroyed so that nothing of those deities remains. It just needs to be basically obliterated. God will instruct them as to the precise locations where sacrifices and offerings must be made. And again, they just can't choose a random space or a random spot to offer these sacrifices to God. The Israelites are told don't even ask questions about how the other tribes have worshiped, because the thought is if they start asking questions, it could become too much of a temptation to some of them. They might start following in the ways of some form of idol worship. So don't even ask about it, just destroy it, get rid of it, and move forward with my directions. This portion goes on further to detail certain laws and ordinances that are actually, in this case, more societal than they are religious in nature. But we also have a reiteration of which foods are acceptable to be consumed. And of course, this goes back to what we call kashrut, the rules pertaining to kashrut. So much of this book, so much of Deuteronomy, is Moses preparing the people to become a nation that is holy, that is righteous, and a nation that is just. We must remember that the people who are gathered here, who are listening to Moses with this big, long speech, are an entirely new generation, a generation that did not have the experience of fleeing from Egypt. So while much of what we're hearing seems very repetitious from earlier accounts in the earlier books of the Torah, we have to know that many of these people are hearing much of it for the first time. And even if it isn't their first time, as any teacher will tell you from my experience as a teacher, repetition is essential to understanding, it's essential to learning. And if you want people to remember something, then you must repeat again and again and again. And again, as a teacher, I can certainly attest to that. In addition to all this, there are several ideas in this particular Torah portion that begin to form the basis of our Jewish belief in Tikkun Olam, or the repair of the world. Reformed Jews are sometimes chided for not being Jewish enough. We do not follow every rule that's set down and explained in the Shulchan Aruch, the codification of Jewish observance that was written by Rabbi Joseph Caro, and which, of course, our Orthodox adhere quite strictly to. We know, for example, we know the laws and we know the rules of kashrut, but many Reformed Jews do not feel the need to follow them to the letter if they do not enhance a level of belief, a level of faith, a level of spirituality. Reformed Judaism gives each individual the free will to follow what makes sense to them, and yet still be regarded as good and faithful Jews. We also do not read the Torah literally, or as the direct word of God, or that the Torah was written by God. Historians, scholars have proven to us that what we call the Torah was likely written by several different authors and at various times was pieced together throughout the centuries. Now, does that make the Torah any less significant or any less important? Not at all. We know that the precepts in the Torah, the lessons that it imparts to us, are what really matter. So we as Reformed Jews are often regarded by our more strict brothers and sisters in the Orthodox world as somehow less Jewish than they are. We are told, and I have had this told to me to my face, that Reformed Jews practice some kind of Fabarama Judaism, for lack of a better term. It's too much of a sort of feel-good kind of Judaism. We're told that we're too concerned with, we are too caught up in social justice issues. Some even say that Tikkun Olam has all but replaced the Torah for Reformed Jews. Why do we even bother with the Torah anymore? And then in answer to those accusations, I can actually return to this week's Torah portion. And in it, I can see the beginnings of this idea of Tikkun Olam, our idea that we must repair the world. Because it's in this Torah portion this week that we're told that every 7 years, we are commanded to practice a remission of debts.
Remission of debt, yeah.
I have,
Tim, you froze on us. I don't know whether you can hear us,
Yeah,
but your connection froze.
right, Tim froze.
okay, after,
Yeah, he did. I wonder if I can reach him. I guess he's working on it. Yes,
Ask Larry if he's gonna see the movie from Mark Resistance.
I can't hear you.
oh no. There we go.
Tell us your name again. I'm sorry, the young fella. Tell us your name. We're Jane and Larry here on our side. We're from Sun City, but we're right now in New Jersey.
Oh, I'm Ace and I'm in New Orleans. I was
You're in
part,
New Orleans.
yeah, I was part of Mikvah Israel until the spring when I had to move around. Not really have any particular place that I was secure in for a while.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said about Mikvah Israel. What was your connection? How did you know about Mikvah Israel?
I was living on Tybee Island. I was working out there.
Okay.
So I joined the congregation because of that. And now I'm kind of transitioning, getting to know the local Jewish community here in Crescent City.
Yeah. Hi.
What made you move to New Orleans?
Yeah, oh, you lost power. Okay,
I'm
I'll let the guys know. Just about to call you. So we are, until you get it back, we're kind of done for today, I guess.
Is he going to?
I'll pass the word.
Jeff,
Should
could you
we
go?
hang around for,
Could you go in another room, Jeff? I'm trying to talk to.
okay,
He's talking.
Right.
It's him.
You could mute there until.
okay. I'm sorry. I just want to give you an update. That was Tim. Tim just called and they have had a power failure out there.
Oh, wow.
He hopes to get it back in the next 5 or 10 minutes, but he said, don't hang around for any more than 10. If they don't get it back quickly, it might be a little long, but that's what happened. And Ace, I'm Jeff, so.
Well, actually, Tim had just brought up something that I was wondering with you two about Tikkun Olam versus Torah study, because I can personally attest that my relatives are much more about Tikkun Olam, and I didn't even consider coming to do this Torah study until like my last year of college, when I realized that most of my Jewish experience was with holidays and birthright, and I had barely done any Torah or dove into it at all.
Yeah, that could be fairly typical for probably, well, I shouldn't say the majority today, but quite a significant number.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you were on Birthright, that was quite an experience, wasn't it?
Right.
Birthright. I mean, it was kind of a total involvement for a couple of weeks, right? How long were you there?
It was
2
a
weeks?
15,
2 weeks?
14, 15 day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was really glad that I went. Getting to actually like visit the places that we've only talked about in Jewish history, and like I guess knowing what the reality is for secular Israelis versus more conservative and orthodoxy there is just,
How long ago did you go? How
We
long
went-
ago were you?
I went in 2018.
Oh, very recently.
Yeah,
Very,
Where were most of the participants from? The United States? Or-
yeah, they're all from the US and mostly Los Angeles. And so
really?
there were a few one from Atlanta, one from Texas, Arizona, but for the most part, it was a bunch of like, I've graduated from college and now I'm going on Birthright, or I'm taking a gap year or taking a summer off from work. And I don't know, I'm always trying to really discover the religious, spiritual side of Judaism. And I felt like on that particular program I went on had that, but everyone else's goals was much more aligned with kind of the cultural and the nightlife side of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. I mean, I had fun too. I'm not saying I didn't have a lot of fun. I've just been trying. I tried very hard to reconnect with my Jewish roots. My family, I kind of had to coax it out of them, in one sense.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Did
you
you go
keep
to
in touch
a
with
lot?
any of the Birthright people?
We're Facebook friends. I wish I could have connected a little bit more than I do, but especially right now. It's like, well, we have the time. Better do it.
What are you doing in New Orleans now?
I'm in a public health program at Tulane, so we're actually about to get started teaching this fall and doing all that.
What are you going to teach?
The introductory, like biology, intro to biology and disease course, kind of like the scattershot. This is why and how we get sick. This is what epidemiology is. And I'm just gonna say, we have no idea what's going to happen. It's either gonna go really well and we're all going to learn how to use Zoom in ways that we can't even imagine right now.
Is Tulane going to open only virtually, do you know, or are they going to have live classes as well?
They're going on the hybrid model. So they've set up these massive temporary structures for classrooms, and apparently they're kind of like big indoor tents, which is going to be interesting considering they were just telling me what kind of flooding that they usually expect in early September. I don't know how long those temporary structures are going to last if we have a hurricane.
Oh, wow, of course, yeah. Well, that's what Florida had, is they had those temporary structures for, you know, for some of the testing, and then they had to take them down during that last hurricane, the one a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, well, all bets are during the hurricane anyway. I mean, you know, they have to disassemble them in advance. Yeah.
Right.
Are you going to do a live class or a Zoom class or a digital class?
We
teaching
got
until
everything.
you-
We're doing everything. Like
No, but I mean, you personally,
some of
you
the class-
personally,
Mhm. It's a big
are you
mix.
taking graduate classes there as well?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're going for an advanced degree now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm in a
Yeah, well,
master's
Tulane.
program.
Is it part of the medical school there?
No, Tulane got a separate school of medicine and a school of public health and tropical medicine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm in the tropical medicine program, so I'm looking at like tropical mosquito-borne diseases, a lot of parasites that are endemic to Latin America, Africa, and there are a lot of them here in Louisiana as well. They're just not as well known because of,
Hey,
Tim,
hey, he's back.
Tim?
Oh, well,
Well-
thank you very much, Ace. We were having an
Hey,
interesting
thank you. That
discussion
was-
with,
You were doing what?
Hey,
we were having an interesting discussion with Ace. He was bringing us
Right.
up to date on what he's doing in New Orleans.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, Tulane, yeah, which is interesting. So we don't need you.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I guess I,
Tim?
I was really interested in what you had said before you cut out about Tikkun Olam versus Torah. Because, I come here because I was on that side of, oh, all I know is Tikkun Olam, but now I'm actually excited and want to learn about Torah.
Well, I mean, as I was saying, a lot of that are people who are not necessarily Orthodox think we spend, as Reform Jews, we're too caught up in Tikkun Olam at the expense of Torah. And we know that Reform Judaism is very, very socially aware. It's very involved in social action. That's a hallmark of Reform Judaism. And those who are Orthodox say that that's consuming us and that that's where we really put our focus. And we don't study Torah and we don't really worry about the Torah. We take it out on Saturdays and we read it, and the rabbi or whoever's leading the service will give, a Devar Torah, a sermon. We put it back, and that's it.
thank you for taking me, Jeff.
So anyway, that's kind of where, what I was getting at, because in this Torah portion, there is really the beginnings of a tikkun olam. There is the beginnings of taking care of the needy. There is, and even as much as we don't want to admit it, you know, the people back in the day had slaves, you know, and yet there, even with slavery, as much as we don't want to think that our ancestors way back when had slaves, they were told that they had to keep their slaves in humane conditions. They had to treat them well. They were also instructed that after 6 years of service, they needed to give the slave the option of freedom. And it wasn't just setting the slave free. It says right in the Torah, you set them free, but then you also give them what they need, you know, in terms of material things in order to go and start making their own lives. So it wasn't enough just to say to a slave, okay, you served me faithfully for 6 years. You want your freedom. Good. Goodbye. Good luck. See you later. You also had to give them what they would need. So, I mean, we see elements of tikkun olam going back into this particular Torah portion. So it's not so much that we're following this sort of hippy dippy Fabarama Judaism kind of thing. We, in tikkun olam and in taking care of the needy and in social action, we're doing what the Torah commands us to do. So that was kind of what my point of this, my Devar was.
What specifically did it say about tikkun olam?
It doesn't use those words. It just, but the whole idea of tikkun olam is repairing the world. Well, if we're commanded to take care of the needy, if we're commanded to have remission of debts, if we're commanded to treat our slaves humanely, give them freedom, give them what they need to start living a free life, to me, that's part of tikkun olam.
Okay.
But tikkun olam as a term, you know, started being, I think, came into vogue more in the 70s, the 1970s. You know, I would see the term coming up when I would read things from different perspectives of Reform Judaism. But I don't think tikkun olam has replaced the Torah. I think tikkun olam is a direct result of what we're commanded to do in the Torah, how we're commanded to behave. Even when it comes down to war, I mean, there's some pretty vicious stuff regarding war in the Torah, including, and there was some of that in this section. But even then, we have some element of we're not just allowed to be these out, not just go in and slaughter everybody and be bloodthirsty and vicious. So if there's such a thing as being a little more humane in war, I guess that's what you'd have to say. Seems an oxymoron maybe, but you know. So, I mean, that really was the point that I was making in my debar before, you know, Georgia Power so rudely interrupted and cut my, I have no idea why it went off. It was off for like about 5 minutes and then it flicked back on.
I was surprised, Tim, being you're the controller on this, I was kind of surprised so Zoom doesn't kick us all off. So
No.
the connections, once the conference room is set up, even if you lose power, we stay here.
Yeah, because it's, and again, it's beyond me how they interconnect everybody on Zoom, but no, if I go, you're all there. And it was just, you don't get a warning when your power just all of a sudden blips off. And I heard the little blip and then the screen went down and I can see the clock on my stove from here and that was off. And I thought, okay, the power's out.
Really important point because we'll be teaching, 100 students through Zoom this fall, and it's very possible that there'll be outages on the faculty, on the teacher end. So and you don't want to have 100 people suddenly get kicked out of a Zoom conference.
Well, now you know, if you get kicked out as the instructor, they're still going to be there. And unfortunately, you don't get warnings, so you can't say, discuss among yourselves before it goes, because Georgia Power doesn't send you 30 seconds. Your power's out in 30 seconds, so be ready, So anyway, so I mean, wherever you want to take this discussion of, what's here in the Torah and Tikkun Olam and all of that, I mean, I don't see it being mutually exclusive. I see Tikkun Olam enhancing the teachings of the Torah. Do Reform Jews ignore the Torah? I don't think we ignore it. We're not studying it maybe as intently as some of those in Orthodoxy who spend hours poring over the Torah and the Talmud and whatever. But I don't think we ignore it because I think we try to live by what it teaches us. But you're free to.
We were on a Zoom call. We're in New Jersey, as I think I've told you many times here. And a couple of our neighbors here are members of the Rumson Jewish Center. Rumson is famous, of course, because that's where Bruce Springsteen grew up. So so I don't know if he was a member there, but at any rate, they gave us all of the codes to get onto the service. And the rabbi ran a class on Tuesday on the same Torah portion. So we sat in on it. They said, sit in and see what you think of our rabbi. So we did. It's a conservative congregation. And he mentioned a couple of things that maybe I'll bring up and you can comment on them. He mentioned that the Deuteronomy has got a couple of differences of some of the commandments compared to in the earlier part, particularly with relationship of marriage, and I forget what else he said, which brought on the question of, if we count commandments, the acknowledged number is 613, right?
Correct.
That's what everybody kind of goes by. So how do you treat a commandment if it's in Deuteronomy and it says one thing, like you can't marry a cousin or something like that? I'm just making this up, but it's something like that. And then in Leviticus or someplace it says you can marry a cousin or something. So you have two commandments that are basically at odds with each other. How do they count toward the 613? The answer that, which was an interesting question, because he said there are several differences between Deuteronomy and between the the other four books.
Right.
But the answer that he kind of gave is that even the 613 is not a fixed number. Apparently Maimonides counted the 613, counted them in his 613, or apparently, the 613 with a capital T. But there are other people that have come on, counted them, and some counted them slightly differently. But do you have any thoughts on that? Did you recognize any differences between any of the ones that you saw? I guess they're pretty subtle.
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly, and I know that even Rabbi Haas has mentioned before in Torah study that there are points where the Torah contradicts, what it has said earlier. And because, again, it wasn't one person who sat down and wrote all of this, and especially in one sitting or whatever, it would make sense that there would be things that would contradict. Now, which one becomes the overriding? If there's two that are different, which one you follow? Good question. I don't know. I guess maybe you'd be safe doing either one, as long as they're both there. You can point to chapter and verse in the Torah if you want to. But there are differences. Subtle. I mean, it's not direct contradiction. For example, you don't have one portion of the Torah that says, thou shalt not kill, and somewhere else where it says, yeah, well, it's okay. It's nothing like that. But like differences in family relationships, like you said, marriage. Because a lot of people forget that the Torah is, and in early years, what do we call it? I can't think of the word right. I guess called polygamy. Multiple wives were actually sanctioned and were okay. It wasn't practiced widely, but it was not looked down upon early in the Israelites' history for there to be. Now, a woman could not have multiple husbands, but a man could have multiple wives.
Yes. Yeah.
So again, sexism rears its ugly head, but that's a whole other subject. But when it comes down to being, and this is again why I have a hard time believing in the idea that one person gets credit for writing the Torah, and God, if God were writing it and it was truly inspired, or he had a secretary who was writing it down as he dictated it, as some people think, there are people who have the belief that God whispered the Torah in Moses' ear and Moses was writing it down. Well, in either case, there would not be these contradictions. There's contradictions because we're going from different source material and putting it together. And, as I said, as an English teacher, I see changes in point of view at times in the Torah that are very abrupt. As an English teacher, if a student of mine did that in an essay, I'd mark them down for it. Where there are points where the grammar and the sentence structure is kind of faulty. So, it was put together and it's what we have. But as I said, I don't think that makes the Torah any less important because of that. In a sense, the fact that it was even put together is a pretty remarkable feat.
Makes it really hard to identify as a Jew, because there's contradictory instructions about how it, not maybe looking not today, but like historically, like what does it mean? What am I supposed to do as a Jew to be Jewish? And so it's like, do I follow these rules or do I study Torah? And does that make us a community? Does that unify us? And so it's very difficult to like decide which one to go with.
Well, you don't really have to, I mean, technically to identify yourself as Jewish, you don't really have to you don't have to study the Torah, you don't have to go to synagogue, you don't have to be there for the high holy days. I mean, you can identify as a Jew and then kind of wash your hands of the whole thing if you want to. And there are people that do. There are people that do.
As you see, very much so with secular Judaism in Israel,
Right.
especially on a lot of the kibbutz movements, because of the heavy socialist influence on certain kibbutzes, or kibbutzim, sorry.
Right. But, you know, so yeah, to be Jewish is you're Jewish. If I never set foot in a synagogue, if I never recite the Shema, you know, if I never, you know, and you may be culturally Jewish because I love a good brisket, you know, or give me good lox and bagels, but I really don't want to have it. And actually, I know a couple of people who are Jewish and they say, oh, I don't want anything to do with that synagogue stuff. I don't want to have to, I want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. But if you ask them, oh, yes, I'm Jewish, and proudly so, they're Jewish.
I think to most people, there is a, it's not an either or. They do both, but it's, the balance between the two. Obviously, if you're ultra Orthodox, then the balance shifts probably more towards, Torah and observance. And when you're more of the liberal or Reform Judaism, the balance may shift away from Torah. But, people do go back to the Torah and they do know their Bible study lessons. And I think that in broad terms, they know them. But, in going to the other extreme, there are just, as you say, the secular Jews who just like, gefilte fish and brisket and things like that.
Yeah, I mean,
going back to the authorship of the Torah, the book "Who Wrote the Bible," I remember from years and years ago, and he kind of comes up with this, at least for the first book, for Genesis, maybe even in Exodus, using God's name in a couple of different ways, and the duality of some of the, the telling of a couple of the stories. He kind of comes together with the idea that it was man written, and that it was kind of put together almost as a compromise between the northern part of what is now Israel, Judea, and the southern part between the tribes, and they each wanted their piece. And they have the different story of Noah's Ark, a different story of the creation, and so forth. And they don't know how that came together there. The Orthodox seem to believe that it's one coherent piece, but it is kind of a little bit of a mishmash. But then he goes into, it's a little more difficult when you get into Deuteronomy and Leviticus on who wrote those portions. And it seemed like those portions were probably, and he goes back into the idea of, well, you should examine the motivation behind it. And he comes to the conclusion that a lot of that was probably from the priesthood. They were written by priests. And that caused a lot of the motivation there for, and I don't mean to sound too sarcastic here, but a lot of it was self-serving. This business of, doing the kinds of things, bringing them to blessings. And, of course, they didn't get a portion, so they had to get their food someplace. But it sounds like, their rationale or their motivation for writing those things were, to preserve their job.
And this is,
I'm saying they weren't devoted, but it sounds like that's sort of the conclusion I read in it. Maybe it's a little more cynical than he would have expressed it.
but
Is there any
Treasury in Jerusalem?
in Deuteronomy? I'm not too familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but do you know if any parts of Deuteronomy were in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Were they found?
I don't know. I don't know, what exactly they have found there. I don't know that they did or they didn't. That would be a good question that maybe the rabbi might be able to answer for us, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard for, I think your idea of, some of being written with self-serving purposes probably is true. I don't know, it's cynical, it's just the reality. The reality is, if you were the author and there's something in it for you, okay, why not? Why not? you're still getting the point across. You're still getting what needs to be there. And if some of it helps you out in the long run, well, okay, that's okay. For me, it's just very difficult for me when I read anything in the Torah to think that, that was this shining light from God that came down. That concept just doesn't work for me, which is why I could never be Orthodox, because I can't wrap my head around that.
Right. When I had some Torah sessions with an Orthodox rabbi and heard what he had to say, and, everything was hard and fast. The earth was, at the time, he would say the earth is approximately 6,000 years old. And I'm saying, how do you correspond that with any scientist who will tell you that's absolutely ludicrous, because they can prove it many different ways. The earth is longer than 6,000. But, he had a literal interpretation of everything, which completely left me out in the cold.
Well, it goes back to that wonderful scene in Inherit the Wind, which is the monkey's trial, the Scopes trial, where evolution is on trial basically against, Darwinism versus religion. And he comes up with the answer that how long was the first day? We don't really know, because there really was the sun wasn't formed, and there was no way of measuring time at that time. Could it have been 23 and a half hours? Could it have been 24 and a half hours? Could it have been a month? Could it have been a year? Could it have been 1,000 years? So, the way of counting time could be different. And I think, as Rabbi Haas has always said, there are things in there that we don't understand as far as the measurements. So, that's part of those Mishnahs that you can go back to.
But inconsistencies is not Judaism alone. I mean, if you take Christianity and the Gospels, it took a long time for them to codify it and even agree. And the Gospels they didn't like, they kind of put away, and it's a whole different group of Gospels that you really cannot get a hold of very easily.
There's a little different. There's a little different because they don't claim that they were written by God. See, they know that Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, those were actual people. And Paul, these were actual guys. So it's a little different when you're reading letters that Paul wrote, to the Greeks or the Ephesians or whoever he wrote letters to, compared to saying that these were written by God. Now, he was inspired probably. But I think that's a little easier to take, that you can pick and choose.
Larry.
Well, when they go back, Drew University, which you're aware of their study for the 10-year study they did on the Bible, who said what and what did Jesus actually say?
Right.
It's amazing what is quoted that Jesus said. They ended up only saying that he said 10% of what was normally attributed. And when this came out, it caused a big hoo-ha, in the community. But this was a very scholarly study, largely by non-Jews, although they had Jews in there as part of the study because of their knowledge on the Old Testament and everything else. But it was quite interesting who said what. So even there's disagreement, within the Gospels themselves.
This rabbi from Rumson, finally the conclusion that was kind of reached, that he has reached, is that you can take the Bible and you can support any position you want, whether it's a right-wing position, a left-wing position, whether it's to love thy neighbor, whether it's to kill thy neighbor, whether it's to have do something immoral or have tikkun olam, by picking the right portion at the right time, from different sections. And the same is true of the Quran, and the same is probably true of the Christian Bible. That you can pick and choose sections.
Disagree. Right. Go ahead.
A quick question.
Ross.
I have to run to an appointment. I just want to ask Tim a question. Tim?
Yes.
Oh, I wanted to make sure. First,
I'm here.
I want to tell you, I love your picture behind you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
what is that? Tell us about
It
that.
has an interesting story to it, but anyway.
You'll have to tell us another.
Right.
My question is, what is the Talmud? How do you define the Talmud? I mean, we're talking Torah here. How was Talmud different?
Well, the Talmud was written, of course, later than the Torah. The Talmud is, and I, again, not an expert on Talmud by any stretch of the imagination. When we had our para-rabbinic training way back when, and we were at Hebrew Union College, we had a rabbi come in and talk to us about the Torah and Torah study. This man was a Torah expert at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. He was a fascinating man. Old man, probably well into his 80s, I think, when he spoke to us, and was going blind as well. And he said, you take a page. You've seen a page of the Talmud, right? You know what it looks like? Because you've got like
Around the edges.
Yes, the
Commentary,
edges.
Rashi around the edges, and
Right, you've got this idea in the middle, and then around the edges are the commentary from various rabbis and sages and scholars, reflecting different points of view. And what's interesting about the Talmud and interesting about Judaism in general is that in the Talmud are also preserved the arguments that didn't win. So you have rabbis arguing about some particular point of law, and they wouldn't agree. Whereas in many cases, the only thing that gets recorded is, okay, this is what we decided it is, this side wins, okay, great. It also preserves the dissenting opinion. And so you have these different opinions that don't necessarily agree, that have a different idea, and it's all there. And studying Talmud is an art in and of itself. I mean, I have not actually sat down and done much with it. I would like to know more than I know, and I maybe take a little bit more study in the Talmud because I don't know that much. But it's this compendium of these ideas and arguments and debating back and forth about various aspects of Jewish law and how different things, I mean, he used an example, and I don't know if he was being facetious with us or not, but he used an example about what do you do in a situation, and if this is in the Talmud, I guess it is, where your chickens, and this was the example he used, your chickens keep getting into your neighbor's yard, and your neighbor doesn't like it. And so what is the Jewish way of dealing with chickens who are supposed to be in your property, but they keep getting into someone else's property? And you think, why are rabbis arguing about this? Chickens. But apparently they would discuss these things because people would come to the rabbis and say, look, Rabbi,
Right.
I'm having a problem. My neighbor's chickens are coming in, and maybe they're eating something in my yard and I don't like it. And I've asked him to please keep his chickens, and it's not. And so the rabbis would have to make a judgment. And I guess so then they would sit around and discuss what to do about the chickens. Now, a lot of the arguments, I'm sure, are much loftier than that, I would assume. But that was just a simple argument that he said. And then you can go to the page where there's this argument and see what the different rabbis said and what their point of view was.
one
I
of the
came up
famous
with an idea how they could solve it.
arguing about the
Uh,
I was just going to say, Larry, before I go to my appointment, I came up with a way they could say, come to a conclusion. Kill the chicken, make a chicken dinner, and invite them both. Okay.
well, that could work. But I mean,
And,
go ahead.
and the chicken certainly won't go to anybody's yard after that.
That's true. That's one way you could solve it, I suppose.
That's the King Solomon solution. Kill the chicken, and the person who says no, don't kill it. That's probably his chicken or
Well,
something.
and I know
don't know.
there's the argument too that I guess this is in the Talmud as well, is there was the argument about the proper way to light the Hanukkah menorah.
That's what I was going to bring
yeah.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got the CMI, and you've got Hillel, and one says, you're supposed to start with all the candles lit on the first night and diminish one each night till the 8th night. And it was Hillel that said, no. You start with one candle and you add light till the final day of the holiday. You've got this bright, beautiful light on the menorah. And so there's this debate going back and forth. And ultimately we follow Hillel, Rabbi Hillel, because we add light. We don't diminish it. And yeah, but the argument for that other version of lighting the menorah at Hanukkah still is there in the Talmud. We
But it
just,
doesn't really have like a Supreme Court decision where,
Jewish text.
let me just say this, place, I just wanted to finish my thought. It's not like the Supreme Court decision in the Talmud where it basically says on the bottom, the winner of this argument is Hillel.
right.
You know, it doesn't really say. So over the years, it kind of like you see all of the arguments, and then practice kind of dictates which of those, you know, you do follow, more tradition. And unless it goes to, I don't know what the purpose of the Sanhedrin was, whether they were called and then to resolve any of these arguments. But there's not one bottom line saying, okay, the winner of the debate is, you know, Hillel. It doesn't
Oh,
say that.
Hillel. Ace, you had
I'm
a
sorry. I just wanted to finish my thought there.
Go ahead.
My attempt at reading volume 1 and your comments on it almost sounds like a more appropriate Jewish text because it's all about arguing and not really coming to a solid result of it. But we don't talk about it at all. I mean, I don't know anyone who's like, yeah, let's try and learn Talmud.
Well, I mean, there are Orthodox, you know, scholars of the Talmud who do sit and study Talmud. In fact, that's kind of some of them, all they do. That's all they do. And the wives go out and support the family, interestingly. You don't really have that, I don't think, in conservative Judaism or Reform Judaism. And maybe we should maybe learn a little bit more about the Talmud. But it is, as you said, it's a very Jewish thing because, you know, we like to debate. We like to have these, you know, back and forth on an issue where, you know, and then sometimes we come to an agreement and sometimes we don't. And that's considered to be a very Jewish concept, is to argue and debate. It's what makes our tradition a little unique because, again, as I've said before, we don't have an on-high authority like a pope or someone who says, this is it, this is the way it is. If you're going to be Catholic, this is what you have to believe. We don't have that in Judaism. There's no on-high rabbi, grand poobah rabbi somewhere in Israel or anywhere else, or New York or whatever, who says this is it. We have a board of rabbis for the Reform movement, and so does the conservative movement, et cetera. But technically speaking, from what I understand in becoming a rabbi, once you have your own congregation, you take direction from the CCAR, which is the Reform Movement's rabbinical board. But if you disagree with something from the CCAR, you're not bound by it. You're not bound by it. And a rabbi is free to, you know,
I think about, you know, I think there are a couple of big ones that maybe most of the conservative rabbis would have to be bound by, you know, intermarriages and
right.
Performing. There are some biggies there, but in general, I think you're right. Yeah. I know our kids, you know, I think people do know more about, we grew up in a conservative congregation in New Jersey for many, many years. And we had a local Hebrew high school. And in the Hebrew high school, they did teach, and this was for all groups that came, somewhat like Georgia, not South Carolina, you know, the one that you have there where the different denominations come together. And there they did teach a little bit of Talmud, and they did teach more of an understanding. And it's an interesting comment that, you know, in that series of Unorthodox, the one that was on TV, and the comment that not the fictional series based on that woman, but on the series, I guess there was a Netflix series also on two men and one woman. And he basically says, you know, you think the women are the only ones that are unprepared in their education. He says the men are really unprepared as well, because they really only study Talmud and Torah and things like that. So the one profession that is open to them pretty easily is the law, because they're used to all of these arguments and they're used to these discussions. You know, that's how they learn, whether they're becoming rabbis or they're becoming students or whatever. And they just go back and forth and discuss it. And I think you see that in all aspects of Judaism. I think you see the discussion going on.
Well,
Both
because
players are the big.
right. I mean, and we're free, you know, we have that freedom to disagree. And, you know, and especially in Reform Judaism, as I said, You know, I have friends who are Reform Jews who are pretty strictly kosher. I mean, as difficult as it can be, but they pretty strictly stick to kashrut. And then I have a lot of Reform Jewish friends who don't care 2 cents worth kashrut. You know, it doesn't matter to them. And then I have some who are sort of, well, I do this much I do. Like I don't eat pork, you know, I don't have pork in my house. I don't even order it if I go out. I try to kind of maybe keep the dairy meat thing as best I can and whatever. So they've kind of adapted it in a way that works for them. But as Reform Jews, we kind of are given that license. I mean, 6% of Reform Jews keep kosher. That's it, 6%. That's it, keep fully kosher. Now, a lot of them have some element of kosher. Others, you know, don't care at all. I don't know what the percentages are among conservative Jews. I would assume it's a little bit higher. And then, of course, you've got the Orthodox, you know, who are, you know, trying very hard to make sure that everything they buy and everything they consume, it's a difficult proposition when you consider the number of dishes and the number of pots and pans and storage for food on different shelves or 2 different refrigerators and all of that. I don't know. I've often wondered this, and maybe somebody has the knowledge here. You know, my brother lives in New York City, and he, you know, New York City apartments are very small for the most part. Many of them are. How do some of those small apartments, how do they keep kosher? If they're an Orthodox, you know, family in a small apartment in New York, how do they have the room to keep kosher?
Have to have 2 apartments, a kosher apartment and a not kosher apartment, I guess, or something.
Because I mean, there's not room for 2 dishwashers and 2 refrigerators. And
Can I ask a question off the subject here?
sure.
Can I ask if you could add, what do you think of the newly announced peace treaty?
Oh,
Discuss all with anybody in
Diplomatic relations?
are you, which one are you speaking about with the United Arab Emirates?
Yeah, with the Emirates.
Right. What do
Israel and the Emirates.
what do I
Yeah,
think
well,
of it?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read it carefully. I haven't read the wording of it.
No, I haven't either. I mean, I think another Arab nation, you know, we have Egypt, we have Jordan, even though relationship with Jordan is a bit frayed right now. I think the fact that another Arab entity is bucking the trend and recognizing Israel is a good thing, because there needs to be recognition on all sides that, you know, Israel is a country, it's here to stay, it is the Jewish state, and Israel recognizing that there needs to be something done with Palestine and all of that. I mean, if we can't move beyond that, then this is never, ever going to end. It's never.
It's already been a military relationship for some time. So it's like they're kind of just formalizing, like, oh yeah, you know, we're actually going to be diplomatically active with you as well as share some military intelligence.
I mean, I guess I need to look at the exact agreement and, you know, kind of examine what it actually says.
How do you read, or what's your understanding of the settlements issue? Because, you know, it turns out that, you know, the settlements will either be delayed, deferred. I don't understand the legality of all of those, you know, permanently, temporarily, they're off the table. I mean, there's so many words that we used. I'm trying to get a better understanding. I don't know if anybody has, you know, heard from an ambassador, or if anything's come out from the reform movement, you know, which has amplified that.
Well, the reform movement's official stance is a 2-state solution stance, giving the Palestinians a sovereign state. Now, what that would mean for the settlements, I don't know if that's actually been decided, whether the settlements would stay and they have to be granted, you know, full authority if the people decide to stay there, but then they would be living inside Palestine. And I'm assuming then they would vote in Palestinian elections and not vote in Israeli elections, which creates a whole big brouhaha. And do those people want to stay if now that land reverts to Palestine and it's no longer part of Israel? There's a whole host of issues. I mean, I'm going to be very honest. I'm not a believer that the West Bank should be annexed to Israel. I'm just not. I know there's that theory out there. And who's the man who wrote in the New York Times just recently? that we need to get past the two-state solution. It needs to be a one-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis live together in one country with everybody having their religious rights and everybody having their sovereign rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which sounds really lovely. But then the Jewish state stops being a Jewish state. So Israel is no longer then a Jewish state because there are far more Palestinians than there are Israelis, Jewish Israelis. You know, so now we have a majority Muslim Arab country that at one time was a Jewish state. The problems are so vast. I sit and I get such a big headache when I start thinking about it. And I don't have an answer. I'm not a diplomat. I know it's a big issue.
I was also wondering about the status of, like, West Jerusalem has got settlements compared to the West Bank. You know, West Jerusalem is different, right, than the West
Right.
Bank. There are settlements there, and I didn't know whether or not that's included in the agreement, whether there'll be no more, Israeli settlements in West Jerusalem compared to no more temporarily in the West Bank. And it just sounded like, the announcement came out, and of course Trump blurted it out because he's so proud of it, and he had everybody talk, stand around him at the news conference, telling him how wonderful he was, and Jared Kushner and getting it done. But it just seemed like there was just so many unanswered questions here. It's not like the end of a war and there's a peace agreement, kind of thing.
I mean, just because, everything right now, I don't think anything at this point. So you have a piece of paper, I guess is what it comes down to right now. But all the logistics, I don't know that that's all been talked about yet. Whether that's like, okay, we got the piece of paper, now we're going to figure out the logistic elements of it. Okay, good luck. I mean, knock your socks off. I don't know how that's going to go.
Never going to be a diplomat, so I don't think I can be ever going to have a good opinion on any of that. I have to go. Thank you, everyone.
All right, Ace. Have it. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Good to
See you, Tim. I'll keep in touch.
All right, please do.
Bye,
All
Tim.
right, we'll
Yes.
see you
I'm
soon.
behind the power curve because I didn't read this morning's paper about the peace treaty. But a couple of things there. It would need ratification, and a very important part, I can't see Hamas and Gaza coming to the table on this right now.
Involved. It's not them. I mean, it's the Emirates, United Arab Emirates.
Oh, what do the Emirates have to do with?
Israel? Yeah, but the settlement
Okay.
was the big issue. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
so it's the Emirates. I mean, that's
The Emirates was speaking on behalf, I guess, of the fact that, of course, the Palestinians don't want any more settlements in the West Bank, or I don't know about West Jerusalem. But it's the United Arab Emirates that are talking
Right,
about, which is
okay.
really more than one country, right? The Emirates are more than one country.
Yeah, it's a union of smaller, like,
Right.
I mean,
principalities or whatever. Yeah.
right, yeah.
But
Yeah, that's correct. It's a
I mean,
group of principalities.
getting recognized by another Arab nation, I think, is a good step in the right direction. I don't know that it really solves anything. I read too that, of course, the rest of the Arab world is really angry over this. They are not reacting well to this. So you've got, Iraq and Iran and whatever have expressed, not being pleased with the Emirates for taking this step. It sounded to me in something I read that this was done in such a way that the Emirates kind of kept it very much under the table and didn't make it known till literally it was released to the media. So
the Emirates, of course, are all Sunni, so they would be, Iran would be very upset about this kind of thing.
Right.
They don't want they want everybody at Israel's throat. Tell us about the picture behind you there. You got
Okay.
30 seconds.
This picture, yeah, it's actually done by an artist. His name is Israel Abramovsky. He actually walked out of the Pale of Settlement in Russia and made his way at some point in his life to Toledo, Ohio, and lived as an artist. And he lived the traditional starving artist. He did not achieve a great deal of fame and fortune, although he does have a painting that hangs in the French embassy in New York, I believe is where it is. We have actually a number of his, and somehow they came to our temple. The work, when he died, and people went into this very ramshackle apartment that he lived in downtown Toledo, and there were all these artworks, some of them studies, some of them not finished, some just everywhere. And they came to our synagogue, and our synagogue stored them. There were no survivors that could be found, nobody to give them to. And so at different points, they would put some of them up for auction. And so we were able to get a few of them. This is just one. I think we've got 2 or 3. There's one over on the other side of the dining room. We have another one. They're gorgeous. His work is beautiful. This is actually probably one of the more uplifting of his pieces. Oftentimes he paints these very orthodox sort of looking rabbis who look very sad and very dejected sort of thing. But we just sort of fell in love with his work, and just this interesting story of this man who was an amazing artist and how he came to Toledo, Ohio. And so we have them, and we feel very fortunate to have them. Yes.
Tim, believe it or not, Toledo, Ohio is one of the major art centers of the country.
It
It
certainly
has
is.
an art museum there that's really outstanding.
I love it. I loved our art museum in Toledo. We would get shows there, like when they were doing, was it the Monet show came through, that other major cities, and they're like, it's going to Toledo? Yeah, it's coming to Toledo, because our museum, it's been ranked one of the top 10 museums, art museums in the country.
Right.
It's
A
gorgeous.
lot of people don't know that, right?
No, it's a beautiful building. It has a performance space in it for the Toledo Symphony as well. And its collection, what it has, of course, Toledo being at one time a glass manufacturing city, it has the largest collection of historic and glass and art and whatever there too. It's worth a visit. If you're ever in the area, it's worth taking a visit and browsing the galleries at Toledo Art Museum, because it's really pretty stupendous.
They have a virtual tour of it online. I'll go online. And
You should
virtual
check,
tour,
especially now with pandemic and whatever, who knows what they put online. But it's a great space. Its collection is really wonderful. And so they were able to bid on and get some, when the shows would come through of different artists. They had a great impressionist show one time. And we would get people coming. It was a draw to Toledo. People would come from all over and spend the weekend and stay in a hotel and eat in the restaurants and whatever. So it was a real jewel for Toledo and the economy of Toledo. And it's just a beautiful building. Even if you just like stand back and look at it, it's just really, really, really nice.
hey, by the way, kudos on the virtual tour of the synagogue. I just looked at that the other day. They put that online, and I didn't read every one of them, but they're very well done. And I like the way it's done in chapters or little modules. So you can kind of click on George Washington's letter or the Monticello, connection, or some of those things. And very, very nice.
Yeah,
very
it was
nice.
a long time. It was a long time coming that was worked on, but I'm glad it's finally there.
Yeah, no, I'm going to tell some of our friends here to watch that, and very, very well done. Very well done.
It's cool.
Okay, we'll see you again.
All right, Shabbat Shalom. Everybody have a good weekend. Take care, stay healthy.
We got to try and get you a wider audience. You do such a good job that
Well, I know we're talking about maybe moving it once we get past the high holy days. I don't know. Maybe we should do it like at a 6:30 on a Thursday evening. Would that bring more people in? I don't know. We can try it. We can see what happens.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Take care.
All right.
Thank you, Tim.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.